So today I want to talk about why it just seems like in essentially every single elo, there's just no solo queue tank mains anymore. Now you can find, tank mains duoed with other players or in, a triple or quad stack, but as far as myself, very seldom do I find a tank main playing by himself on a main tank anymore, which used to actually happen quite a bit in the past, but isn't showing up much anymore. Today I want to talk about that and why, again, there's so little tank mains. And with all that said, let's get started. So I think the problem about why a lot of tank players have stopped playing is that tanks are very unique and very, very different from each other in role, in damage dealing, in everything. And when you look at other roles, of course, characters are unique, but in general, they focus on one thing. If you are a DPS, you're focusing on getting kills. Sometimes you focus on applying a little bit of crowd control like, Mei or Sombra, but mainly getting kills, finishing people off. If you're a support, you focus on getting heals. But if you're a tank player, on paper, yes, you are focusing on creating space and on tanking. But in reality, all the tanks are very different and have very different jobs. And I think the reason why a lot of tank players have kind of left is that as seasons change, their tanks really get shoved to the sidelines. And they're forced to learn someone new that's completely different. Let's use, for example, Zarya. Zarya was very good Season 3, Season 2. Did so much damage, had so much charge, was just one of the best tanks in the game, along with Reinhardt. But, as we move on to, let's say, Season 8, where there's spam comp, you have Roadhog and Orisa. When you look at Roadhog and Orisa as your main tank choices compared to, let's say, Zarya and Reinhardt, those are completely different characters with completely different ways that they're supposed to play their kits. And yes, again, every single character in the game, I guess, is different, but as far as tanks go, you could see how maybe you won't like playing Roadhog, even if you did like playing Zarya. But with tanks, I feel like you kind of have to play the meta tanks no matter what the meta is. Or at least if you're a tank player, you're somebody that is supposed to be playing the meta no matter what it is. Because, you're the filling player. You're the player playing what no one else wants to go for. And I guess that pressure, along with the fact that it's kind of hard to switch from a older tank to a newer tank, and mainly it's not that fun for a lot of players, that really does kind of siphon down the pool. Let's say that you used to be a Reinhardt main, but he's been useless for like 4 seasons, and you don't like Orisa, and you don't like Roadhog, and you don't like any other characters. Yeah, you can kind of see how that goes on. And what really accumulates to such a big problem with tank players and with tanks is that playing 2 tanks that don't mix just doesn't really work. If you play, let's say, Zarya and Orisa, you can make it work, but most of the time it won't. So one of you has to switch to a meta character. While if you're playing, for example, Genji and you have a Tracer on your team, that's cool. If you have a Widow on your team, that's also cool. If you have a Soldier, that's cool. It doesn't really matter. DPS, you don't have to rely on the other one. Support, you don't have to rely on the other one at all. With tank, you do, and I think it puts a lot of pressure on people to play the new characters that they really don't want to play, and I think that is why a lot of tanks just kind of swapped off of it. It's a problem that I guess does affect every other role, but I think is extremely expedited in the tank role, just by the way that the class works, by the way that the class relies on other tanks, and I guess by the fact that there's so little tanks that when the meta swaps, you really don't have that many choices compared to a lot of the other roles. I think that is one of the main problems that we don't really talk about that I think is very important. Now, of course, other than that, there are some other, problems that do show up with tank players that kind of makes them want to get off the tank role. And I think one of the biggest ones is that a lot of the fill players that used to play tank have kind of just eventually swapped off to DPS or support. And I think this kind of happens because A, YouTubers telling them that these other roles are better to rank up with, which is true in a lot of cases, but, that obviously gets you off of them. And B, there's just not that many fill players in the game anymore. Most of the people that I think that used to fill all the time have kind of either moved on to an exact role that they decided to play or to a different game, because a lot of the fill players were people just playing the game more for fun, not tryharding, and they've kind of gone away now. And a lot of the fill players were playing tank. And I think it's kind of weird because support has actually gotten a bit more popular throughout the months and the years. There's a lot more support players than there used to be. But on the other hand, there's a lot less fill players that used to go tank, so that role's been kind of dying on the vine just a little bit. I guess there have been, let me mention this right here, a lot of diva players and a lot of people one-tricking exact tanks that you might see. But as far as people filling the correct tank in the correct situation, it has been going down quite a bit. Now, to another different thing, I guess, about tanks, is that the game has been out for a while now, and I know that maybe I mentioned this too much, but I think that a lot of tank players have kind of realized that a lot of the tanks just feel like they have a low skill ceiling, and it feels like it's very hard to improve as them, and it feels like there's just about nothing you can do better to win other than have a better team. And in most cases, I'm going to say this is wrong, because you look at XQC, you look at Muna, you look at a lot of other players that are very good at tanks, and they're obviously climbing and doing well, but on paper, it doesn't really feel like that. And on paper, it feels like if you're a tank main that's been stuck for season after season, switch to something else. Switch to DPS, switch to support. While I don't think support players, when they're doing bad, really think, hey, I'll switch to DPS, I'll switch to tank. That doesn't happen too much. And DPS players, most of the time, they're like, hey, I just need to get better. I think tank's a role that you just kind of think to yourself, I'll switch off of this because there's nowhere to go. And as well, of course, I think a lot of people just have kind of gotten bored of a lot of the tanks kits because they are a lot more simple and rely a lot less on mechanics that are easy to get better at. I mean, most of the time when you want to get better at tank, you just have to play the game a lot and get a lot of game sense. And for a lot of players, I think that just kind of has not become what they want to do, and they've kind of switched off of it for both of those reasons. Now, another thing I kind of thought about just barely earlier today was that there haven't really been any new fun tanks added to the game and no real kicks into the tank system. There's been Orisa, but I mean, some people like her, but most kind of think she's pretty boring, not very skill expressive, just kind of is there. And when you compare that to Ana, Doomfist, even Mora, even Sombra, it's pretty obvious to see that maybe tank could use something more exciting added to their lineup, or really just something other than a main tank that kind of sits on the card. There are a few options for tank, mainly D.Va, Roadhog in some situations, Zarya, but still I think a lot of people would start to play tank more if there was another tank actually added to the game to kind of bring them back into that role, because when there's a new tank added, people flock to that tank, try it out. Eventually, maybe they're deciding to play some other tanks as well, and the tank pool will increase as a whole. That's what's happened to DPS and support respectively with the new characters. But so far, that hasn't happened, and I think that is something that we need to make so that there are actually some tanks left when you go into a solo queue match. And I guess another thing about that, solo queue in particular, that I should mention right here, is that I think a lot of the tanks are kind of getting tired of needing to communicate with their team. And I know that every role does need to communicate, but with tank, it really feels like you have to communicate a lot more than other roles, especially for me. If I'm playing D.Va, I have to call out who I'm going after, I have to hope that people are calling out who I have to protect, and really play around my team. And that can kind of be stressful, but when I'm playing Doomfist, I mean, I should call out stuff, but most of the time, if I'm just playing well, if I'm just getting picks and playing by myself and doing alright, well, I can be kind of quiet and do okay, and that's the same with a lot of the supports. As long as you're healing okay, you can kind of be quiet. I think a lot of people playing tank have just kind of gotten done with the toxicity of their teammates, done with the toxicity of team chat, and just somewhat play other roles because it doesn't need that as much. I know that this isn't going to be the #1 reason why tanks are switching off, but I think that could be a smaller reason to why some of the tanks might be doing that. It might have just eventually started to happen. And I guess right here, speaking of something else that has eventually started to happen, I think that the fact that the game has been quickening up so much and speeding up also does hurt a lot of the tank players, because a lot of tank players, I think, like a slower paced game where you're playing someone like Reinhardt or Zarya, trying to slowly get damage, trying to slowly get picks. But the way that the game's been played for a lot of seasons so far is very quick. Getting dive, getting damage, getting DPS out there, going Winston, going D.Va, and that's just kind of the best thing to do in a lot of situations. A lot of people that used to play tank don't really feel like the game's even close to the same anymore, and they just kind of switched off. I think this mainly applies to Reinhardt players. A lot of people I know used to like Reinhardt, used to play him, but just won't play any tank anymore because he's kind of out there. As well, I guess it does kind of feel like sometimes that since the game is so fast-paced, you can easily play with 3 DPS now. You don't really feel like a tank is needed, so no one really wants to actually play that role. Of course, there are tank mains sometimes, but I think that might be another reason to why some finally, stop showing off as much. And I guess the final reason why here to this topic today is that I think that the game of Overwatch itself doesn't really show off tanks that much. There isn't really a tanking stat in the game. I mean, there's a healing stat, there's a damage stat, there's all that, but there's no real way to see who's doing tanking right or doing tanking wrong. And I think that kind of makes people not mentally excited to play the role way too much. And even if you look at something like the Overwatch League, for example, tanks aren't really advertised there that well either. Especially in live streams, there's not too many tank players, there's only like 1 or 2. But in the Overwatch League again, sometimes you'll see a D.Va player, sometimes you'll see the very beginning of a Winston dive, but other than that, you almost never see a tank point of view. And I think with the lack of just advertising for these type of characters, and with the abundance of Tracer and Genji and Mercy, and I guess, you know, some with Lucio and Zenyatta gameplay all over the place, yeah, you could kind of see how there's just people that kind of get seduced to playing other roles, I guess, and stop playing tank as much. And I think in general, I guess that's all I'm going to say today about why there are just no tank mains left in Overwatch competitive solo queue. With all that said, though, I do have to keep you guys in mind that, yeah, I do find some tank mains sometimes. They are there, and there are some people that will fill tank. That happens quite often where you'll, you know, eventually finally get somebody filling tank. But as far as tank mains that are just trying to play tank, that has been very rare for myself, at least at around the high diamond masters level. But I would like to hear you guys' own opinions, and of course I know there are some players that are going to be saying, hey, I see tank mains all the time. Yeah, it does depend player on player, but at least for me personally on my main and alt account, it has not really happened way too much in the past while. Anyways, with that all said though, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like. Comment down below, again, your own personal opinions about this, and if you used to be a tank player and why you aren't anymore. With all that said though, guys, thank you all for watching, and have a wonderful day.